Income inequality has been on the rise in most countries over the last 50 years. What I will do here is to explore what is the role that online trade can play in trying to reduce the increase in income inequality around the world. In order to do so, I will start with some facts regarding the evolution of income inequality and globalization in general. Then I will provide an explanation of how globalization and integrating into global markets can affect income inequality. I will explore then the role of online trade, and I will end up with a prediction. Income inequality has been increasing since the end of the Second World War. Before that, in the 20th century, there has been a decline in income inequality between the early 20th century and the end of the Second World War. When we look at the evolution of globalization during this period, we realize that globalization also follows a very similar pattern. Beginning in the 20th century and during the two World War period, there was a decline in the extent to which the world was globalized. From the end of the Second World War, there has been a steady increase in globalization, regardless of whether we measure it as trade integration, financial integration, or integration international migration. Economists have had a lot of trouble explaining the role played by globalization in explaining the pattern in income inequality around the world, and that's in spite of the very clear similar coevolution in both income inequality and globalization that we have just described. Now, the reason why they have had trouble finding the impact that globalization has on income inequality has to do that most of the studies have tended to use traditional trade theory. And in traditional trade theory, there is usually only one type of firm, only one type of consumer, only one type of worker. And in that type of model, it's going to be very difficult to find any income inequality at all. Forget income inequality provoked by globalization. So what the new trade theory has done is to bring heterogeneity into trade models. It has bring different firms, different workers that differ across many characteristics, including income, and therefore give a chance for globalization to impact income inequality. And what these models tend to tell you is that as trade costs start reducing, start declining from very high levels when you are almost in an autarky situation, and you start observing declines in trade cost, then income inequality will tend to increase. Why? Well, because at the beginning of the globalization process, it's only the largest firms, the more productive firms, that are able to pay the trade costs associated with exporting. And therefore, it's these already large, already more productive firms that at the very early stages of globalization are going to be able to benefit from acceding to the global larger market. At later stages of globalization, when trade costs are already quite low, and smaller, less productive firms are able to enter, to pay the cost associated with entering export markets, then globalization, increases in globalization, is likely to lead to declines in income inequality. These kind of models can explain the patterns that we have observed between the evolution of income inequality and globalization, and the reason why income inequality has been rising as globalization has been rising is that there hasn't been enough globalization. Trade costs have not been reduced enough during this period. Can online trade help? The answer is yes. When you observe the patterns of online trade across different countries, so trade that occurs in online platforms, well, distance seems to matter much less for trade flows that are observing on online platforms than for trade flows that are observed offline. The reason for that is that trade costs are declined quite significantly by these online platforms that help connect very small producers, which are located, may be located in very remote areas, to other very small consumers who are also located in very remote areas. Distance matters much less online than offline. In other words, the world is much flatter online, allowing consumers and producers located in very remote areas to connect with each other, which was impossible or almost impossible in offline markets. This leads to the fact that in online platforms such as eBay or Amazon, almost 100% of the firms that participate in these online platforms are able to export. They connect to consumers in different countries. When you compare that number with the number for offline trade, offline firms, you have that only 15 to 30% of firms participating in offline markets are able to export. So you go from 30 to 80, 90, 100% once you move to online markets, allowing all firms, the smallest firms and the least productive firms, to connect to global markets. More importantly, the distribution of sales in online markets is much more equal than the distribution of sales in offline markets. The share of the top 5% exporters in online markets, it's somewhere around 30 to 40%. The same share offline is somewhere between 80 and 90%. So a much more equal distribution of sales in online markets. This brings me to my prediction, that is, as online trade grows and keeps growing faster than offline trade, we're going to observe that more firms are able to benefit from global markets, and these are going to be smaller firms benefiting from global markets, which will lead to a reduction in inequality as globalization deepens thanks to these online markets. There will also be a democratization of trade as smaller firms benefit. All firms can benefit, and it's not only the largest multinational or the largest firms that are able to benefit from global markets. Finally, the impact is going to be more important. The impact of increases in online trade is going to be more important in remote areas, in countries which are located in remote areas far away from the economic center of gravity of the world. Thank you.